Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shlomo Einhorn, and want to thank the OU for putting this together. This annual conference each year is really one of the exciting, parts of the Los Angeles Jewish communities. We bring speakers together from different parts of the globe, sharing Torah, sharing ideas, and sharing the best of what's out there over the course of a year. The topic of my class today is on one of the last projects that Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was working on. And it's quite unique. It really is quite unique. And I'm going to introduce it to you today. So with Koren, right, the great book publishing company, famously known for their font, the Koren font is a beautiful, beautiful font. Koren, really made a splash back out on the scene, 10, 15 years ago when they came out with their Koren Siddur. And then since then, they've been on a run of amazing, amazing publishing productions. So Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and along with the late Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, really became Koren's, sort of go-to writers. And Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was working on a new translation of the Chumash. And the objective of that translation was to speak in a very direct and clear way and do what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks does so well, which is communicate. That translation of the Chumash was then going to be used for several projects. One of those projects was a project that I was working on with Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, is the Koren Lev Ladaat teen Chumash. And what that means is it's a Chumash that is geared towards young adults. It's amazing that we have no such project like this ever. I write about this, and I'm going to introduce you to Sefer in a moment. I write about this in the introduction that I recognize and I noticed how all of these, New Testament or Christian works, there's tons of teenage adaptations of their version of the Bible, that sort of make it appealing or, match up with where teenagers are at. There's so many versions. I mean, if you go into a bookstore, you'd see literally, 50 to 60 different versions that are geared towards young adult and teenagers, but we don't have that for our Chumash. Now, part of the reason for that is because we teach up. That's just the way we do it. We teach up. We sort of make the Torah a little bit out of everyone's reach. In education, that's called zone of proximal development. And you then have to sort of climb through the steps of Jewish education in order to get access. There's a pro and a con to that. The pro is that you develop a level of education and ownership within the knowledge of that content that puts you in a separate league, that puts you in a place where you are really intimately connected to your Torah. It's not just like another book that you pull off the shelf. But on the other hand, sometimes if we don't give our children enough access at an early age, we're not feeding them the very thing which we believe to be the source of life. So it's with that in mind that I introduce you to this amazing project, the Koren Lev Ladaat. This is the Nagel edition, Koren Lev Ladaat Chumash, translation by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, with a commentary written by myself and Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Grumman. The first edition that is coming out, that's out right now by Koren, is Shmos. Okay, Shmos is the first one that's out. All five are coming out in sequence. Why Shmos first? Very often when sets come out with publishing houses, they start with Exodus, start with Shmos. Just an interesting little quirk there. Now, I want to share with you some Torah from this Chumash. This is not a sales pitch, but this is to introduce you to something that I think can be applicable to you. You'll find meaning in this, I think, even at ages that are well beyond young adult. And that's why we don't call it the teen Chumash. It's really the young adult or the Koren Lev Ladaat Chumash. It's there to empower the student. It's there to empower the individual so they're not a passive participant in the study of Chumash. So let's open it up. Let's learn about some of the features in the Koren Lev Ladaat Chumash. First of all, a beautiful artistic feature here highlighting the Shmot part, since this is that part of the set. So this is dedicated, by the way, by Los Angeles, the great, doctor. This is by Dr. Jack Nagel, a family dedicated in his honor. As this is a West Coast OU conference, this is very special to Los Angeles to be able to have a project like this and dedicated with love by his children in honor of Dr. Jack Nagel, Mr. Jack Nagel. So here we go. So near the outset is my introduction, the editor's introduction, and it's there that I lay out the purpose of this. And I want to share with you how this started, how this developed. What if there were no more bookstores left on earth? What if we woke up to discover that the written word had been almost eliminated? This is the frightening possibility we confront when we visit the last bookstore in downtown Los Angeles. The last bookstore takes the guise of a survival shelter, where all of Earth's great books are sold, in case there may one day be no other place to find books. I once had the opportunity to spend some time there, and I found my way to a Bible which included a commentary for teenagers. It roused my curiosity. Why is there no edition of the Chumash directed towards young adults? Ought we be simply waiting for young Jewish people to come to the Torah instead of bringing Torah to them? Now, some might say that teens aren't interested in the Chumash. They are mistaken. And what I point out is that I've been teaching teens for 22 years. And one thing about them is they can ask an interrogative question of analysis that's more piercing than any other age demographics. And if anything, they're the ones who are looking for and are seeking and are demanding the truth. And therefore, the Torah, we know it, is an Eitz Chaim Hilmachazikimo. It's a tree of life for all those who hold on to it. And what I lay out here in the introduction is 10 reasons why we study Torah. 10 reasons why Torah is so critical, so important. The reason I went with this in the introduction is right now very popular Simon Sinek's book, which is, The Why. It starts with Why, which talks about the great organizations are ones that have clarified the why they are there, why they do what they do. And I felt that any book that's going to appeal to teenagers, if teenagers are going to find access to the Chumash, it's got to explore the why. Why do we study Torah? So for example, number one, Torah is the blueprint of the universe, right? Starting at the very beginning, right? The Medrash teaches us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is stakel ba'araisa u'barei alma. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and then created the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is stakel ba'araisa u'barei alma. He used the Torah as a blueprint, and therefore, don't we want to understand the world? Our job is to figure out life, to figure out its meaning, to figure out why things are the way they are. We then have to go back to the blueprint. And Torah is the blueprint for the world. Number two, how to practice Judaism. Torah teaches us how to live as Jews. It teaches us you have to know what to do, just the what to do. Okay, I'm Jewish, I get it. What am I supposed to do? What's my role? What's my positioning? And therefore, Talmud Gadol sheTalmud mevi lidei ma'aseh, brings us to action. The values of Judaism. Torah guides us not only just how to practice the halachos, what to do, but how to live the values of Judaism, charity, education, right? Chinuch, tzedakah, bikur cholim, all of that. These are the sensibilities that we derive from the Torah. They really concretize and form our persona. And then to help us do battle. The Chachamim interpret, sort of this war that we have. The Torah is symbolic of our war with the Yetzer Hara, our darker impulses, or the shadow side. Right? Barati Yetzer Hara, Barati Torah Tavlin. I created the Yetzer Hara, but I created the Torah as the antidote. If you need to contend with the darker parts of your personality and the struggles of the soul, the dark night of the soul, that's what the Torah is for. Oxygen. The Gemara in Brachos teaches us that just as a fish can't live without water, we can't live without Torah. Ein mayim ela Torah. This is our life force. This is our energy. This is our oxygen. Crisis management. Famously, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky points out that why Yosef at Tzaddik, right, was given special treatment by Yaakov. He learned with that son more than the rest. And Yaakov foresaw that this Yosef is going to need a special level of Torah. He's going to need the Torah of Yeshiva, Shem, and Aver, which Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says is crisis Torah. How to handle the most difficult of circumstances, the most difficult of situations. And that's what Yosef took with him wherever he was. Torah is about crisis management. Any challenge you'll ever face, it's there in the Torah. There is no challenge we have not dealt with or we're going to deal with that we have not already dealt with in the Torah. A significant reason, and a theme I come back to in the commentary on the Chumash, is developing a relationship with God. Part of our mission in this world is to cleave to Hashem and to understand that Hashem loves you. Hashem has a relationship with you. Look, he's guiding you. He's been guiding you throughout history, taking us on a journey of discovery, a journey of correction, of tikkun. And that's what this Torah is. Next, it's the great equalizer. The amazing thing about Torah is that someone who's a very beginner can find meaning in the Torah, can find significance, can find an insight that, children learn it when they're little children in school, 4 or 5 years old. They come home with parsha sheets. And then the same parsha could be opened up at a guy in yeshiva at the highest level. And next, 9, it's your story. Project years ahead and imagine bringing your spouse back to the house of your parents. While you're cleaning up your home, you find your old yearbook and you can't wait to share it with that person that you love. Why are you so excited? Because you're going to share the story of your life. Havdil, the Torah is the story of our life. And last, it's our way out. Life is a maze. And we're making our way through that maze. The notion of life being a maze is really made famous in the Mesilas Yesharim, the garden maze mashal. And sort of the Torah is our compass to navigate the traps and the pitfalls of life and to make our way through it. Now, let me introduce you to some of the different features of the text itself, and we'll explore a few of them here. Wisdom of the heart, the Lev Ladaat commentary. That commentary is designed to make you think critically about the stories, the laws, the poetry of the Torah, and how they relate to your life. It's too personalized. Any young adult in their exploration of learning, they come at it from a vantage point of how it relates to their own personal space, their own personal journey and what they're going through. If it's about something nothing to do with them, there's less of a connection there. And that's the wisdom of the heart piece, sort of relating back the text to what they're going through and then finding your story within that. Then there's the classic commentators. This section does a great job. What this is, it takes some classic commentaries on a certain subject, and we're going to plug this in and see in a moment, shows you how they fall on this issue, but then it forces you to think about how each are different and how they're nuanced. Which one may read better in the text, which one reads better with the full context of the chapter, which one resonates with something you had learned when you were younger. Textual skills, there are different, flashpoints along the way where we use it to accentuate certain skills within the text so you could begin to develop and learn from those skills. There's the quick bite section. Listen, you're going to an NCSY Shabbaton. You're asked to speak at your high school, Shabbaton or, Parsha Shmuz. Quick nugget, quick bite, something quick to say. There's a bunch of these. Some of them are on the page. Some of them are at the end of the chapter, and you have some of those ideas as well. Another piece here that I find significant is the exploring hashkafa piece. At the end of the chapters, there are major philosophical questions, challenges, topics that are discussed that are at the end of each section. So let's dig in and let's go for it. Okay. So first of all, take a look here at the opening section. There is an introduction to each section of the Chamishe Chumshei Torah. So I'll read this to you. The world of Genesis is no longer. The legendary pioneering forefathers and foremothers are memories we learned about through stories we were told. We have grown so fast and so large that we're no longer just a family, but the beginning of a nation, the descendants of Israel. And yet, with all of our success and comfort, there's a nagging feeling that something may not be right. Our neighbors look at us differently. We feel that we don't really belong in the mainstream of society, and we struggle with our identity. Are we who we are because of our ancient traditions or because we are not like those around us? So right away, what we set out to do was to begin to take the story, and this is the story of the Jews who are well-to-do as they came down to Egypt at the end of Sefer Breshit, and they're here at the beginning of Shemot, and to take their story and to overlay that onto what you may be going through. What's the reason for your identity? Are you who you are because you're different, or are you who you are because of something proactive that you believe in, or is there something that makes you different? So we want people to think of these stories that happened many years ago as very alive and right now. That being said, the beginning of each parsha sort of has that introduction with, a little more controversial, but nothing too edgy, a secular quote as well, just to grab the reader. For example, in Parshat Vayera, a quote from Benjamin Disraeli: "The secret to success is to be ready when your opportunity comes." That's it, harmless. Okay. Now, let's go into the Parsha a bit. First of all, the feature here. I mean, The standout feature is just Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's beautiful translation. Magnificent, absolutely magnificent. So let's take Ve'ele Shmot B'nai Yisrael Haboim Mitzrayim. These are the names of B'nai Yisrael who are coming down to Egypt, who came to Egypt. Haboim, who came to Egypt. Et Yaakov Ishu Beitu Bo, with Yaakov, each with his household. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. Okay, now watch the translation here. Very straightforward. This is different. If you look at your typical English translation of a Chumash, it'll be much more complicated. Now, there's good reason why they're more complicated. They're incorporating Rashi's Pshat or Ramban's Pshat when they're translating. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's goal was to translate straightforward readability. So, Vayihi kol nefesh yotze derech Yaakov. So let's just use those words. And it was all the souls that come out of the thigh of Yaakov. 70 souls. It's very hard. You're reading a text. What does that mean? So Rabbi Jonathan Sacks went with, the descendants of Yaakov were 70 in all. Simple, straightforward. You could read this straight, and the storyline and the narrative is very straight. Okay, another example. B'nai Yisrael paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu v'ya'atzmu b'ma'od me'od. But the Israelites were fruitful, and they burgeoned, and they became exceptionally strong. B'ma'od me'od, exceptionally strong. V'timaleh ha'aretz osam. V'timaleh, it's not and the land was filled with them, non sequitur, but rather they became exceptionally strong until the land was filled with them. Readability is the focus of how Rabbi Jonathan Sacks did this. We're going to get to a few more examples soon, but let's look at some of the pieces here. So in the Lev Ladaat section, in the Wisdom of the Heart section here, so let's move that there. In the Wisdom of the Heart section, so it starts with this comment. Names in Tanakh are meaningful. They say something about the people described. So the name Yaakov earned for himself an additional name, Yisrael. Those two names have very different connotation. The name Yaakov comes initially from the word Akev, heel, as Yaakov was holding Esav's heel at birth, but also echoes trickery or deception. It was the wily, streetwise Yaakov who took Esav's blessing and who worked hard to outwit Lavan. By contrast, the name Yisrael contains the word Yashar, straight, honest, and is used to describe the man who takes the high road. Interestingly, in these opening psukim of the Torah, it uses both the names Yaakov and Yisrael in referencing the family that went down to Egypt. As descendants of Yaakov, they're going to need to be streetwise in dealing with the Egyptians on their way out of the exile. As descendants of Yisrael, they will learn that to fulfill their ultimate destiny, they're going to need to rise above that. Okay? And I finish with a question here. How does your name affect or express your identity? How does your name affect or express your identity? Forces you as the reader to think about what your name is, and are you true to what your name is? Right? Are you true? Maybe your name's Aloysius and you have nothing to do with it. But what is your name? Are you true to it? I mean, the Gemara tells us there were 3 who were given their name from before they were born, right? There's some interesting shot here. The 3 who were given the name before they were born was Yitzchak, King Shlomo, and King Yoshiyahu. What's the link between all of them? Yitzchak was the first korban, right? He was the first korban. He was that Kedas Yitzchak, Hara Moriah. So he prepared the place of the Mikdash. Shlomo HaMelech was the one who actually built the Mikdash. King Yoshiyahu saw that it was going to be destroyed, so he hid the Aron and the menorah. He planted the Mikdash for eternity. Yitzchak prepared it, Shlomo built it, Yoshiyahu saved it for eternity. It's the Gemara. It's Rav Dessler's, I think, shot on the Gemara itself. Now, some of the classic commentaries here, the commentator section that we have on this Koren Lev Ladaat Chumash. So, if you notice, the parsha begins with a brief listing of Yaakov and his clan of 70 as they descend to Egypt, and the commentaries want to know why this is necessary, right? There's a longer version of this listing, beginning and ending almost identical, that's in Bereshis Mem Vav. So why do I need this here now? So the classic commentator section delivers you 3 Mefarshim, and by the way, the beautiful thing about this, and what makes this also different than other Chumashim, it doesn't just quote you them in English. You have the Hebrew. So you could learn it as a student, no matter what age. You could learn it as a student. Rashi, This is famous. Even though he counted them when they were alive, b'shemosim, chozer umonon b'misasim. He counted them again when they died. Why? Lahodia chibasam, to show how much he loved them. That's Rashi, famous. Rashbam. Because the Torah wanted to highlight and say, B'nai Yisrael paru v'yishratzu. B'nai Yisrael were fruitful and burgeoned. Hutzrach lichbal. It repeated that when they first came down to Egypt, they were only 70. Meaning, this is amazing. Rashi's understanding, and you have to begin to think. The questions for thought on the bottom. There's also the Ramban here. The questions for thought on the bottom says, which of the above commentaries sees the entire passage as one unit? Meaning, the reason for the repetition, Rashbam says it can't just be to restating out of love. That's an emotional reason. It's not going to fit with what the context is. The pshat of the context is they were burgeoning and growing. The proof to burgeoning and growing is let's relook at that timeline. That's why it's necessary. Okay, so it's amazing how the commentaries fit in and how they read and how you could learn to develop and build skills within them is just terrific. There is, by the way, a nugget at the end of the parsha. I told you at the end of each parsha also has a bunch of nuggets you could take with you, Shabbaton or something like that. You want to be able to have something to say when you're there. So I turn to the end of the parsha, end of parsha mode. So here it is. Look how it looks. More quick bites. Let me show you how that section looks. More quick bites. Okay. So here I point out that Rashi comments that even though Bnei Yisrael are counted in Genesis as they descend to Egypt, they are counted again in the beginning of Exodus as a demonstration of God's love for them. Chibasan, right? Because of God's love for them. Right? And Rashi gives you a comparison to like the stars of the sky. So in explaining the comparison of Bnei Yisrael to the stars, Rab Aaron Leib Steinman suggests that just as counting stars serves no purpose other than to appreciate the wonder of God's creation, so too God's counting of Bnei Yisrael is just an expression of adoration. Meaning, why would you count stars? Just out of love for astronomy, the sky, the beauty of the universe, and all of it. It's the only reason you would count stars. What are you counting for? So too the counting of Bnei Yisrael. It's purely just out of love. Okay, that's a quick bite. You have a quick nugget. You quick to our Torah. There's a few of these at the end of the parsha. So that's that piece. Just to continue a little further in the pshat. So in the translation on the next page, right? Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo Yosef. There was a new king that arose over Egypt who had not known Egypt, who had not known Yosef. Now, in almost all chumashim, it'll literally translate the words. When Paro says, Hava nitchakma lo. See, the word lo, God, let us deal wisely with them. They'll usually translate the Chumash as let us deal wisely lo, with it. Lo is it. Bnei Yisrael is an entity. But it's not easy to read. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was going for readability. Certainly very important when you're designing a young adult Chumash. So come, let us deal wisely with them, right? Pain year, but they might increase. Right? They might, if war breaks out, what will happen is they'll join our enemies and fight against us. A lot of Chumashim will translate it literally and say, and they'll come up from the land. Jonathan Sachs is straightforward. Escape from the land. Escape from the land. Gets into a bit of slavery here. And the commentary on the bottom, the wisdom of the heart here, quotes Frederick Douglass. And a little also different with this Chumash to get quotes like that, but feel that it helps. Abolitionist reformer and runaway slave Frederick Douglass once said, "The life of the nation is secure only while the nation is honest, truthful, and virtuous." According to the Global Survey Index in 2017, an estimated 40 million people enslaved worldwide, right? So talks about just bringing home that slavery. Oppression is still a reality right now. So the Chumash dips into the realms of Tikkun Olam-like subjects, but from a very healthy and constructive place, in a very contemporary place as well. The idea of Paro here, let me introduce you actually to the piece at the end here. Exploring Hashkafa. Oh, another piece I just flipped to by accident. We left at the end of the section space for notes. Young adults like to think, to write their own thoughts. to imagine, to conjure up, to make their own connections, to develop a skill set of chidushim. We wanted to allow and enable that to happen. There's another page here, by the way. If you want to just straightforward Chumash with Rashi, let's say to use for the classroom setting or for yourself in shul. So we have here this section, which is just Chumash and Rashi at the end of the back end of the Chumash, which is a lot of great elements. But my favorite is the Exploring Hashkafa section. What we did here is we took a topic that is difficult, that teens would ask or ought to ask, adults should ask, and face it head on. So for example, the end of this parsha is Exodus and archaeology. Many people are troubled by the apparent lack of archaeological evidence for the Exodus from Egypt. After all, wouldn't you expect that there would be all sorts of findings supporting such a momentous event? Right? Where's the archaeological evidence of the Jews in Egypt? So we develop some of that here, some approaches to it, to be able to give a conversation piece for the teenagers to begin to explore. Listen, you're not going to solve all of this in one page. Books are written on this, but you begin to ask those questions. You begin to discover. You begin to, sort of go down that road. Part of what I discuss here as well is that if you notice that when they come to Paro here, Paro is not willing to accept any other deity. Let my people go. Paro doesn't want to hear about it. And the question is, how come sort of the Paro in Sefer Bereshit that kidnaps Sarah turns to Avram and says, why didn't you tell me? Like, you should have told me about your God. And it's like, why is that Pharaoh open to God, but this one is not open to God? And I suggest the following theory that everything here is sort of made to draw in the young adult in a way that's thoughtful for them and not glib, doesn't undermine them or doesn't take them, as a non-serious student. But rather the theory I suggest the following is that if you look throughout Egyptian history, every single pharaoh was a polytheist. They believed in multiple gods. There was only one monotheist in the history of Egypt, and that was Amenhotep, who believed in the sun god Amun-Re. That was it. I like to argue that the pharaoh in Sefer Bereshit is the common pharaoh, the polytheist. So why didn't you tell me about your God? I would have accepted it. I have one, you have one, we would have been good. But the one over here by the story after Yosef's death and Moshe Rabbeinu, this one cannot accept another pharaoh, not another God. No, there's none. And therefore would not let the Jews go, which says to me that's exactly the midah keneged midah, the measure for measure of why the plague of darkness, of choshech, because he believed in the sun god, and therefore darkness is the opposite. At the end of Bereshit, at the beginning of Va'era, I wanted to capture sort of the climax or the crescendo that was happening here at the end of Bereshit. It seemed like Moshe was complaining that, God, you had made things worse here for us, or I have made things worse. I told you I can't be the guy to do this. By the way, there's a lot of great content here on Moshe and his development, but that's to unpack. But I wanted to capture the feeling at the end of the Parsha, which I think sometimes goes unnoticed, perhaps because it's the end of the Parsha. But look at the critique that sort of Moshe has at the end here. By the way, one of the hashkafic pieces at the end of the Parshas is about arguing with God. Now, here he says over here, then Moshe returned to the Lord and said, okay, it's beautiful. The font, the Koran Hebrew font is just gorgeous. Vayashav Moshe el Hashem vayomar, Adonai lama hareosa la'amazeh. Why, Lord, have you brought harm to this people? Lama zeh shalachtanu. Right? Is this why? Right? Is this why you have sent me over here? Is this why you sent me? Lama zeh shalachtani. Sorry, lama zeh shalachtani. Why have you sent me? Me'az bati el Paro. Great translation of Me'az bati. Ever since I came to Paro, lidaber bishmecha, to speak in your name. Heirala amazeh. He has dealt worse with his people. V'hatzel lo hitzalte et amecha. And you have done nothing to deliver your people. Wow. Stark. Vayomer Hashem Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Ata tireh. He says, now you're about to see Asher e'aseh leFaro, what I will do to Paro. Ki beyad chazaka yishalchem, ubeyad chazaka yigarshem me'artzo. And by mighty hand he will send them forth, and by a mighty hand he will drive them from his land. So There's some Divrei Torah here. There's a Kli Yakar. There's a Malbim. How to understand all of this. Some great stuff here. What I wanted to draw your attention to is how I began Vayera based on this. Was God's plan backfiring? What seemed to Moshe like a sure bet took a turn for the worse. But maybe that isn't so surprising. We feel like we're on a roll, like nothing can stop us, and then something goes wrong. Something we didn't expect. We stumble, lose momentum, and feel like we failed. The truly determined won't let that obstacle stand in their way. They find a reservoir of strength they never realized they had, and that's the moment when God reveals to you that together you can do it. Empowering, I try to anchor this in something inspirational. The goal is for a young adult to want to keep this with them, to keep this with them in their backpack, to keep this with them when they go away for Shabbos, to turn to it in their dark moments and their light moments, to keep this as something they celebrate with. And that's what we come into the next parsha with. We jump right into that. One aspect of greatness is transcending what you believe are your limitations. Much of what we think we can't do, we really can, but we're not willing to make that extra effort, push ourselves beyond our limitations. Greatness is found within those who face their weaknesses and drive themselves to overcome them. Pushing, sacrifice, all noble ideas. We took ideas that we'd hoped every young adult would have understood and assimilated, ideas that you wish you would have thought about when you were this age. We really seek and hope to cover within this Chumash. So, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, it's such a loss to have lost Rabbi Sacks this year. I mean, we've lost a lot this year. We lost, Rabbi Edin Steinsaltz, the Pittsburgher Rebbe, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld just recently. So many giants this year. It's incredible. It's incredible. What Rabbi Jonathan Sacks' output could have been still was immeasurable. There was so much more to write. His last book on morality is every chapter is so essential as its own course, as its own class within schools and college, universities and beyond. But in the end, it could be ironic that a translation that is lent towards a Chumash for teenagers may be the legacy that Rabbi Jonathan Sacks leaves that may have had the greatest impact on the future of Klal Yisrael. Mirz Hashem, forward to celebrating together and acknowledging the greatness of Torah in every generation as it's able to renew itself. I want to close our Torah in this space from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky notices how the Gemara prescribes for us a very specific way to learn Torah, a third per day Mishnah, Gemara, Torah. Is how come we never follow that? No one ever follows it. And many times, formats for learning have been suggested, and it keeps changing. It says the only mitzvah like this that we, like lulav, you don't keep changing the way you shake. There's one way to shake it, and that's it. They have a different minhagim. There's one way you do it, and that's it. Says Rabbi Kamenetsky, the goal of Torah is that it remain alive, relevant, and vibrant. Whatever process gets you there can keep changing in every generation. So the way in which we achieve that will keep changing and maybe even look different in each generation. Because the goal is the result, that Torah is used as a catalyst for growth and for change in this world. And therefore, while in some ways this Teen Chumash seems something new, something different, it is the same old Torah, brought to life in a very unique and different way. We thank Rabbi Jonathan Sacks for his translation, thank Koren for their amazing work, and thank the OU, the platform for this shir. We should have a great day.